Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And one time I went somewhere that I'm specifically being vague about in the interest of the preservation, well-being of the people I know who are still working there. But this is a missionary kind of situation. We're in a part of the world that is very impoverished and has a problem with dictatorial leadership. And these friends of mine went there to build things that would serve the church there and benefit people, and just unapologetically try to convince people to become Christians, and even if they ended up not becoming Christians, to gain an education, to gain skills, and to thrive at life. This thing was a good idea. It's still a good idea. I love that they were doing it. But one of the risks that they dealt with is that there were some pretty hostile forces there, governmentally and socially. And in order to build anything, they're kind of putting a bullseye on their back, because you can't hide a building project. People know what's going on. And there'd been a lot of incidents where something would get built and it was just a little too nice. And then somebody from the, again, choosing my words carefully, from the seat of governance would see that, or someone from their family, and be like, well, I want that, and I take it from you, kind of like the Naboth's vineyard situation up in the northern kingdom of Israel that we hear about a little bit earlier on in the Old Testament. And so these people I knew, they had to build carefully. They had to sandbag a little bit because they didn't want it to be too nice, but also they needed to make something that could actually meet the needs of people and accomplish what they were trying to accomplish. And I had the privilege of being there for a while and trying to help them move that ball forward. But it was so eye-opening to have that different building environment in place, unlike the really very safe confines of where I live. I mean, you got to go through a whole bunch of hoops to get a building permit and get everything right. But on the whole, probably nobody's going to come and murder you while you're building that new shed in your backyard. And probably the president of America or like his nephew or something isn't going to drive by your little middle-class neighborhood in Rapid City, South Dakota and be like, that, stop the coach. That is the finest shed I have ever seen, and now it shall be mine. That doesn't happen here at all. And so it was a different mental equation that I had to run for what it would be like to build in that context. Likewise, there's a pressure that becomes evident in Ezra chapter 3 when the exiles are returning to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, to reestablish a sacrificial system, to rebuild life there in general. There's this pressure they're under because even though they have the protection of Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, who issued the edict approving them to go and do this, the neighbors, the people who were left behind by the Babylonians, they are not so excited about this new favor or favoritism that has been shown to the Jewish people. Now, I saw a comment the other day in the subreddit, or maybe somebody shot me an email, I don't remember for sure, but the question was, do we know that other people groups were receiving this treatment from Cyrus the Great, or was this just something exclusively for the Jewish people? And the answer to the question is, we know that other people received a similar treatment. This wasn't one special thing for the Jews. This was an empire-wide policy that the Persian kings employed, Cyrus, and then eventually his successor Darius, and certainly very much the king who we think is the king of Book of Esther, Xerxes. He very proudly continued with this tradition of having a great degree of local autonomy for formerly captive groups under the now defeated Babylonians. And in fact, that Cyrus cylinder that I keep talking about, the JBL speaker football-like looking propaganda thing that Cyrus sent out all around his empire, there's even a line in there indicating that he liberated the captives, not just the Jewish ones, but the captives of his empire were set free. And that's why it's a really good thing that the gods ordained that Cyrus, of course, would conquer the world and get rid of the Babylonians, because those Babylonians, they were never going to let anybody go, and Cyrus is better. And hey, maybe he has a point. So what you got then is a group of people who were left behind, who did not go into exile, who have had 70 or 80 years in this relatively empty place that is at rest, according to the author of the Book of Ezra. They've had time to build up their own little thing. It's largely unsupervised, and they avoided the plight and the pain that the Jewish people had gone through, probably by denying their ancestry to whatever officials or military leaders were acting upon Nebuchadnezzar's orders in 586 to take all the Jewish people captive. Well, let's say you're that guy, and let's say your name is Ron, and your job is to figure out who all the Jews are and take them captive. There are going to be certain Jews who, just by merit of where they live and like obvious records that would be immediately accessible to Ron, we know you're Jews. You have to come with us. That's the deal. But there are going to be other people who live out in the hill country, whose ancestry is a little more murky, who might look at that and be like, what? Jew? No, not at all. There's no reason to take me captive. I'm not that. And maybe they could point to an ancestry that is a result of intermarriage with, Canaanites or other people in the area. And maybe Ron would look at that and be like, I don't know. I'm not sure enough. I don't want Nebuchadnezzar to be mad at me again. Cool. You can just stay or whatever. And indeed, in the very end of, is it at the end of 2nd Chronicles? I think it's at the end of 2nd Kings. Maybe it's the end of both of them. Now I'm just stalling. I do this sometimes. You can tell this is my stalling voice. When I'm trying to find the part of the Bible where it says a certain thing, I might have to just summarize this. Nebuchadnezzar. I found it. The stalling worked. 2 Kings 25. Nebuchadnezzar comes and he conquers Jerusalem. And then we'll pick it up in verse 11. It says, Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile. I guess that's the guy I've been calling Ron. Nebuzaradan. I'm going to stick with Ron. Carried the people who remained in the city along with the rest of the populace and those who had gone over to the king of Babylon. But the commander, here we go, left behind some of the poorest people of the land to work the vineyards and fields. And then it goes on to say the Babylonians broke up the bronze pillars, the movable stands, the bronze sea that were the temple of the Lord. They carried the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots and shovels. I mean, they even took their shovels. Jerks. Wick trimmers, dishes, and all the bronze articles used in the temple service. I mean, it's like looting a church. This is really, it's gross and it's sad what you get at the end of 2 Kings. But I got excited. There's a Bible over there. I started reading it and I started going on the thing. The point is, there were people who were left behind. How they got left behind is a little ambiguous. The author of 2 Kings seems to give us the impression that maybe Ron left behind the people who didn't seem as valuable or as important or as likely to be useful to Babylonian culture. But I don't know that we get enough there to understand what criteria was employed. But when we cross-reference that with Ezra, when everybody's starting to go back and we see the emphasis on demonstrating that you are Jewish from your records, that gives us the impression that there was some sort of ethnic selection that might have happened there as well because of how important it is to the Jewish people at the time of Ezra, at the time of the return under the leadership of Zerubbabel, descendant of David, to demonstrate that you are indeed Jewish and that you have a part in this situation. This might seem like it's really minuscule and unimportant, but it turns out to be very crucial to the story of how things unfold with this rebuilding effort. So big picture, back to the book of Ezra. Zerubbabel is overseen setting up the altar. First thing, as soon as we get back, what should be the first thing we do? I think we need to resume sacrifices to God. Cool, let's do it. So they get that cooking and they move ahead bravely despite their fear, Ezra 3:3, of the peoples around them. They built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. But you caught it, right? The text says that they resumed sacrifices and they started doing things even though they felt very exposed. In the same way, back in that part of the world I'm not going to specifically describe, those people I'm not going to specifically name had to build very carefully and with one eye on the project and another eye on the people around them who were hostile to the project. So there's a tangible fear of the descendants of the people who got left behind and maybe some other people who have moved in. That fear is perhaps motivated out of an understandable jealousy that would happen now that those vine dressers and plowmen left behind by Ron and Nebuchadnezzar back in the day, now that they've grown up into their own little people group, now they're kind of mad that maybe they bet the wrong way and now they're not getting the benefits of the blessings of the favor of the king of Persia. But again, despite their completely justified concern, as we'll see moving forward, that these neighboring people could pose a threat, they proceed forward with reestablishing the altar and then moving toward putting together the foundation of the temple. They hire masons and carpenters, and they come up with a way to provide food and drink and all of the stuff that it's going to take to get this thing done. They appoint new priests, or rather assign priestly duties, as chapter 3 continues to unfold. And time-wise, I'm going to tell you about this one tomorrow. There's a bittersweet moment that happens at the end of Ezra chapter 3 that I think summarizes so much about everything that's happened up till this point in the Old Testament, and summarizes a lot about where things are going next with the story. But I'll just hit time out right there and we'll pick it up later. The point is this: per the Edict of Cyrus, the building is now underway in Ezra chapter 3, but things are still very precarious because there's very meaningful resistance, and Jerusalem is a long ways away from Cyrus the Great and his court back in Persia. So if the Jewish people want to get this task accomplished, they're going to have to fight for it still. More on that next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.